Hey everyone, my name is Perry and welcome back to the cassette phase. So it's a dreary, rainy day here, and for whatever reason, I like to watch old fantasy movies and read old fantasy novels on days like this. Maybe play some Legend of Zelda or some Final Fantasy, things like that. So I figured it would be the perfect day to do another top 10 VHS movies video. And this time we'll do the fantasy genre. Or at least movies that to me feel like they belong in the fantasy genre. And the criteria for this list, as is usually the case around here, will be kind of loose. We're going to look at movies ranging from the late 70s to the early 90s. And the range will be even wider than that if we include the honorable mentions. And really the only qualifier will be that I have to own the movie on VHS. And that's really going to help narrow it down because there are just so many films which could fall under the umbrella of fantasy. So I'll take you over to the rug and we'll take a look at some tapes. And as always, we'll share some memories that I have around these particular movies. And keep in mind, this is my personal list, so it's probably not going to align with critical acclaim, which I am perfectly fine with. So if you feel like spending some time in the den talking movies on this dark and rainy day, come hang out. Okay everyone, welcome back to the rug, where I want to start off with some honorable mentions before I get into the actual top 10 list. And the first movies that I want to talk about as far as honorable mentions, I've got a stack of Disney clamshell VHS tapes. And these are some of the earliest movie memories that I actually have. And I think a lot of these come to mind when I think about fantasy as a genre. And the first one is this Robin Hood, which this is the first iteration of this story that I was ever introduced to. And honestly, it's probably still my favorite version of the Robin Hood story. And there have been some pretty good ones over the years, but I just loved the treatment that Disney gave to these characters. Just classic Disney animation. You know, great music, good adventure, good fantasy. And it's kind of like a running joke in the VHS community that these Black Diamond VHS tapes were going to be worth money one day. You know, it's kind of like the Beanie Baby. People were going to stash these and they were going to be worth a fortune one day, but no, not the case. These are, a dime a dozen. You can find them everywhere for pretty cheap. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they're some great old stories. Yeah, so let's move it on to the next one. The Sword in the Stone may be the first, sword and sorcery type movie that I ever saw. Going way back. 4 years old probably. And it's still one of my favorites. It's a classic, timeless story. Again, great characters, great animation. Yeah, really fun movie. Let's keep going. Into the 90s here, early 90s. What do they call it? The Disney Animation Renaissance. The Little Mermaid with the Beauty and the Beast, and then the Aladdin and the Lion King and all of that. This may be my favorite out of that bunch. It's tough to say. I kind of go back and forth. Sometimes it's Lion King, sometimes it's Aladdin, sometimes it's this one. I guess depending on mood and time of year and things like that. But the little French town that they start the movie in, I just think is one of the best like fantasy settings that we've seen on screen. Just the architecture and the way everything looks. Yeah, who doesn't like Beauty and the Beast? And you know, on this channel, I'm all about staying young at heart, and what movie describes that feeling better than Peter Pan? You know, this one gives you the feeling of flight. And there's a great, you know, old classic ride attraction at Disney World for this. For as dated as it is and as simple as it is, it's still really fun. One of my favorite attractions at that park. Good old Peter Pan. And then the last one for this stack, we've got Sleeping Beauty. Which, I mean, look at the design of the dragon. You know, the evil queen and the knights on their horse and everything. Just a classic fantasy animation. One of Disney's earliest animated features, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I love these old Disney fantasy animation movies. Let's keep moving. Okay, for these next two honorable mentions, I grabbed a couple of early 80s VHS tapes, which I feel fit into this genre pretty securely. And that would be Excalibur and Conan the Barbarian. How epic are those covers? And I forgot this artist's name. I should have researched that better. It's on the tip of my tongue, but this person, his art was everywhere back in the day, and it's just so epic. And honestly, both of these covers remind me of the covers that you'd see on great old 80s fantasy novels that I like to read so much. Now, these aren't movies that I've seen a ton. You know, these were before my time, so I didn't see these as a kid. You know, I went back later and watched these as an adult. So they don't have quite the same, place in my heart as some of the movies that I'm going to talk about next, but still great, sword and sorcery. They've got the charm, the not so great effects. And that's going to be a theme throughout most of these videos, or most of these movies that I talk about, is that the special effects weren't the best, but that's part of the charm. And that just meant that they had to rely more on story than they did on visuals. Yeah, just great artwork on both of these. $1981 on Excalibur. And another movie from this time that I wish I had on VHS, but I don't, is Red Sonja. I have a bunch of her comics, but I don't have the movie on VHS. I need to get that, though. Again, 1981. So these came out the same year. Solid honorable mention on both of those. And the last one for the honorable mentions, and I wasn't sure if this would even count as a feature film, but I'm pretty sure it did release in theaters. So that means to me it counts. And that is He-Man and She-Ra, The Secret of the Sword, which I believe is just the first 5 episodes of the She-Ra cartoon, I believe. I could be wrong on that. I'm definitely not a historian. If you want the history of this property, go check out Pixel Dan. But I just remember, hearing about this. I didn't see it in the theaters myself, but I was super excited to find this on VHS a few years back. And this is also a lot of sci-fi, as you all know, but I think it fits into some of the fantasy tropes as well. And I will forever love the opening song to this, which I believe they later on, shortened and then turned it into the ending credits song for the She-Ra cartoon. The Secret of the Sword, 1985. Just had to include it. I think it is just 5 episodes strung together, but good enough for an honorable mention. Okay, let's get into the actual top 10 list here. Starting with number 10, we have Lady Hawk with Matthew Broderick and Michelle Pfeiffer. Now, this is also a movie that I wasn't familiar with as a kid. As I've gone back and explored a lot of these 80s, movies and shows and books and comics that I never got to as a kid, and I'm enjoying them as an adult, this is definitely one of those. The first time I watched this, I was like, what is going on with the music? It's quirky and weird, and now I'm like, I think it's, looking back at it now, it's like the perfect atmosphere for this movie. It's like kind of progressive sounding, like a little bit electronic in parts, but yeah, really cool old fantasy movie here. Just, I like it just enough to land it on the top 10. It's probably the one that I've seen the least amount of times out of this group, but I still really enjoy it every time I watch it. The only thing I don't care for about this VHS, and am I the only one that's like this? I don't like it when it's like a Warner Brothers Hits. When they put this banner at the top, it just shows that it's like a newer, like a really, one of the later versions of it. It's not the original printing or anything like that. I don't know. It just kind of takes away from the art for me, but better than nothing. Happy to have it in the collection. Lady Hawk. For this next one, let's go back into the Disney vault, the Disney archives, for a really underrated animated film, The Black Cauldron. And I'm probably going to talk about this movie a little bit more, not in this video, but when we get to October and we start talking about my favorite movies to watch around Halloween, this is definitely one of those. So I'm going to probably talk about it in a little bit more detail then. Disney's masterpiece. I think they called everything a masterpiece on their boxes, which is funny. The history with this one, I don't know everything, but I know that this was not a successful movie. In fact, I think it almost ended part of their animation division because it was such a flop. Which is a shame because I remember seeing it as a kid and obviously now as an adult, and I just think this is pretty fantastic. It's got a great, really cool, menacing looking villain. The animation is great as always. And just a good little story. It goes by quickly, but if you hadn't checked out The Black Cauldron in a while, if it's one of those movies that you're like, I didn't like that as a kid, so you've never gone back and revisited it, give this one a try. Okay, for number 8, let's go back again to Neverland. This time for the early 90s picture, Hook. I go back and forth on whether I like this better or the original Disney animation Peter Pan. They're both great in their own way. They both just give that feeling of staying young at heart, keeping in touch with that inner child. Don't just always grow up into a boring adult. Keep some of that wonder as long as you can, if you can. I love those themes. I can remember seeing this one in the theater. I think it might have been around the holidays. I could be imagining that. Great cast. I don't know that they could have cast that much better. And there's some goofy, cheesy stuff in this, as is the case with a lot of movies that I like. But I do consider this fantasy, and I think it definitely fits, well within this list, coming in at number 8, Hook. Okay, so number 7 is going to bring us our first entry from the great Jim Henson. And here we have The Dark Crystal. Probably could have been a little higher on the list looking at it now, but what are we at? We're at number 7. I think that's pretty good. I love the look of this clamshell too. I usually prefer the slipcover VHS case. I usually like that better than the clamshell, but this one, the art's just fantastic. A one-of-a-kind imaginative marvel. And like is the case with a lot of these, you kind of have to watch these through the lens of the time that it came out. You're watching puppets. You're watching a Jim Henson production. But as a kid, that never took us out of the story. And, I'm capable of having letting it have that same impact as an adult. There's some kind of creepy stuff in here too. There were a couple of scenes in this that kind of freaked me out as a kid. But yeah, The Dark Crystal. I didn't care for the Netflix series as much when they redid, a couple years back. It was okay. Some of the scenery and things were beautiful, but they weren't quite able to capture the charm. Yeah. Any other fans here of The Dark Crystal? Love that one. Number 6 on the countdown. And this movie blends right in with all this awesome paperback cover artwork. And that is none other than Legend. Now this is one that I saw not when it came out back in the 80s, but sometime in the 90s. I think I caught this on like a free HBO trial weekend or Cinemax or Showtime, one of those. We had like a free trial and this came on. And I just kind of had it on in the background, but it definitely caught my attention. And now it's one that I watch pretty much once a year. How cool and menacing is that villain? And Tom Cruise himself has even said that he's not that proud of this. He's, kind of written it off as just 80s hokey fantasy. But we love that stuff here at the Cassette Phase, do we not? And you had, from Ferris Bueller, what was her name? Mia Sara, I think was her name, as one of the protagonists here with the unicorn. Oh yeah, there it is, Mia Sara. Yeah, directed by Ridley Scott. Yeah, this is just so cool. And you just can't forget Tim Curry as the Lord of Darkness. Again, perfect casting. And his performance really kind of steals the show. If you haven't given Legend a try, highly recommend it. It's almost always streaming on one of the free platforms. I didn't check before I made the video, but it's almost always on like Tubi or Pluto, one of those. If you want to check it out. Coming in at number 6, The Greatness of Legend. All right, we're up to number 5 on the list here. And I kind of cheated a little bit, and I put 3 films in here for one slot. But I think you'll understand why when I show you these animated versions of The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Return of the King. And these are definitely out of order. Let's move that. That's going to bother me. Let's get to the chronology right here. Now, are these the best versions of this story on film? No, not at all. But they definitely have their charm, and the animation is so cool. I think some of these used, if not all of them, they used like that old rotoscoping technique, where they used like real actors and stunt people, and then they kind of went back and traced over the filming of that, which looks really dated, but in something like this one, Lord of the Rings, it makes the ring wraiths look so cool. I feel like they look really dark and menacing, intimidating, as they should. More awesome cover art there. And you don't get the full story, of course, but you don't usually get the full story in the movie versions. Like when it's a movie adaptation of a classic, novel or book, you rarely get the full story. These are very abbreviated, though. If you want something closer to the full story, obviously the more modern Peter Jackson films are the way to go, and those are great. I love those too. But I own one of those on VHS, but I don't have the whole trilogy, and I just don't associate those with VHS. I don't really think of those as older movies. I think of those as DVDs and Blu-rays and 4Ks. But yeah, and this Hobbit, this one's actually still sealed. I think I have a clamshell that I have open that I've watched. $1977 on that one. I know that this one was 1978. Galadriel looking a little bit like the who was it from Pinocchio, the blue princess or whatever she was called. Looking very similar there. I love the way the hobbits look in these, though. Yeah, I think this one stopped at like the Helm's Deep section of the story, and then I think they kind of picked up. Not the biggest fan of the way they made Gollum look in these, but these are very nostalgic for me. I remember seeing them on TV. I think maybe checking out a couple of these from the library back in the day. Not as good as the books, of course, not as good as the modern movies, but still very cool. And they fit, perfectly into this list at number 5. All right, we've made it up to number 4 on our countdown. And we're going to revisit our old friend Jim Henson again with Labyrinth. And this was another one. I don't know, I feel like I've said this a lot, but there were parts of this that creeped me out as a kid. Very quirky, but lots and lots of charm. Great Jim Henson work on this. I mean, we watched this as kids. Who didn't immediately have a crush on Jennifer Connelly? I mean, let's be honest. But yeah, the music is great. The story is great. I love all the creatures. I couldn't wish for a movie with more imagination or fun. That's about right, Leonard Maltin from Entertainment Tonight. Yeah, another one that I like to watch, in the fall and around Halloween for whatever reason, but just a great one. I actually prefer this a little bit I like this one a little bit better than Dark Crystal. What about you guys? If you had to choose one or the other, which one are you going with? Either way, number 4 on my countdown belongs to Labyrinth. All right, number 3, we're getting up into the heavy hitters here. Who doesn't love The Princess Bride? And much like Fred Savage's character at the beginning of this movie, as a kid I had to be convinced. Usually someone says, hey, we're going to watch a movie. You're like, okay, you just go with it. All right, movie. Can't go wrong, right? But when they tell you it's The Princess Bride, you know, and you're like an 8-year-old boy or whatever, and you're sitting there like, really? I could definitely relate to Fred Savage's character in this. But once you get going, as you all know, this is a great fantasy adventure movie. Lots of humor, obviously lots of heart and romance and things, but actually pretty hilarious movie at times. I think this is my second VHS copy of this. I think the other one, I had a VCR eat the tape. So it's always good to have backups on hand, especially when it's one of your favorites like this. (1987). And you know, I didn't realize until much later, like probably 5-6 years ago, that this was Robin Wright from Forrest Gump. I feel like she looks a little different in this, but it's definitely her. Rob Reiner directed. Very quotable, memorable movie. Definitely a classic in my book. Any other fans of The Princess Bride? Number 3. All right, we're almost done, guys. We've made it to number 2 on the countdown, which belongs to Willow. And you know, there could be times for me where this is number 1. I could easily swap number 1 and 2. Just great classic fantasy right here. Another one that I saw in the theaters, and then I believe we had the VHS tape, and every friend that I knew had the VHS tapes. This is one that we played a lot when we were over at friends' houses. Yeah, and I feel like a bad Willow fan because I haven't watched the newer series on Disney Plus. I don't know. I didn't hear the best things about it. I will eventually go back and give it a chance, but it's hard for me when, you know, something from your childhood that you treasure, when they do a newer version of it or a continuation, it just hardly ever lives up, you know, with very few exceptions. But I'll go back and watch it, but I just don't know how it'll ever live up to the original. Coming in at number 2 on the list, Willow. All right, coming in at number 1, it should be no surprise to anyone who's watched this channel at all, and that would be The Never-Ending Story. And I've got both the clamshell and the slipcover here. And I've talked about this movie a lot on the channel already, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you know, when I was sitting down to work this morning and I saw the rain hitting the window and hearing the thunder and everything outside, I was like, oh, I need to put in Never-Ending Story. That's like my favorite rainy day movie. And that made me think, okay, why don't I go ahead and do my top 10 fantasy movie video today? So it was perfect timing. Yeah, this is another one where the effects and everything, and the music, it all sounds and looks a little dated. But if you view it through the lens of, you know, the time period that it came out in, and let that be part of the charm, this really is a great story. Not so much for the sequel, or the sequels, but the original just can't be beat. And I have heard that they've been toying with the idea for a while about doing a remake or some kind of like sequel or a series or a movie. I don't know. I'd give it a shot, but I wouldn't be that excited about it. Let's just keep this one as it is. I actually have part of that, like Falcor here. I actually have that tattooed on my arm as well. Can't really see it, but flying right there above E.T. and the Millennium Falcon. So this is definitely one that is important to me. It was the one that introduced me to this genre, really. I mean, I saw this one before I saw any of the others that I've shown you today. And I really do think it's one of the reasons why I like reading all these silly novels now. That can all be traced back to this movie. So, number 1 on the list, Never-Ending Story. And there we are. So I really appreciate you all hanging out with me for a few minutes on this rainy day here in the den. I hope you enjoyed taking a look back at some of these charming old fantastical features. And if you did, consider subscribing. But for now, and as always, relax, enjoy life, and be kind. We'll see you in the next one.